Hi there, I'm Rick Partlow. Welcome back to How to Write Science Fiction That Doesn't Suck. Today I want to talk to you about combat and action scenes. I've avoided really having a video specifically about action because it gets done a lot. It's not something that, I felt like needed somebody to discuss it because a lot of people, a lot of podcasts, a lot of YouTube videos describe how to write action scenes. But I've recently read a lot of bad action scenes, so I felt called to make a video about it. Which you'd be surprised how hard it is to come up with ideas to make a video on. I could ramble on for a half an hour on anything, but I try not to ramble. I try to have a point to the videos I make. So, by the way, before I get started, if you have ideas for a video that you want to see, let me know. dutyhonorplanet487@gmail.com, or you can comment on the video on YouTube, or you can reach me at www.facebook.com/dutyhonorplanet. I really could use suggestions, what you want to see, because like I said, I can get on here and rant for a half an hour about any subject, but I'd like to talk about what you want to talk about. So, right today I want to talk about action. In science fiction, that usually means starship battles or, shooting at each other with futuristic guns on the ground, but let's just talk action in general. Now, the problem with writing action scenes, there's two problems, really. One that afflicts beginners and one that afflicts people who've been doing it a while. The one that afflicts beginners is easy enough to diagnose. There is a tendency to do a blow by blow, that's hard to say, description of an action scene like you're watching a movie fight and you're trying to make notes of each move that the stuntmen make when they're fighting each other and pretending to be the main actors. Like Joe threw a roundhouse kick at Bob, and Bob blocked it with his forearm, then ducked in, swept the leg back, cocked back his right arm to punch Bob in the face while he was on the ground, and on like that. I mean, a little of that goes a long way. You can use some of that. You can use that for a couple of paragraphs maybe, but when you're doing a fight scene that may last a couple pages, that gets boring. Nobody wants to read that except maybe people who are really into martial arts and are reading your book for their martial arts fix, I guess. And there are people like that, But what you're trying to do when you're writing an action scene is not do a treatise on the most effective martial arts. You're trying to get inside the head of the guy who's doing the fighting, or girl. And the way to do that is not to do a blow by blow for 2 pages. When you're fighting, and I haven't been in a real fight since high school, so don't take my word that this is the case. But I mean, I have sparred, and I've done it in several different settings and tournaments, in mixed martial arts classes, in Taekwondo, in Krav Maga. So I've grappled and sparred with all kinds of people. And when you're doing that, you are not thinking, oh, it's a roundhouse kick, I should counter that with this. No, you react. You've either been trained or you're going on pure adrenaline and just striking out the only way you know how. And that's another thing to consider, is how skilled the main character is in actual fighting. But either way, they're not going to be thinking about what they're doing. And I feel like too many people, too many writers are writing fight scenes from a third person omniscient point of view, and they need to remember they're writing the book in third person limited. They need to be seeing things through the eyes of the person fighting. You get slugged in the face. You know how it feels? I know how it feels. It feels like there's like a big dull ache in your face, and it distracts you. You might have stars in your eyes. You might have blood running out of your nose, and all that distracts you from what's happening. You're not going to be describing every move the other person makes unless maybe it's the first punch of the fight, or there's been a break and you've like pulled away from somebody. Then you might be waiting to see what they do, but you need to be describing what the character's feeling, not what their every motion of what they're doing. They don't think, okay, set down 1 foot, tap. That'll get his attention. Now I'm going to do a double kick, one kick to the ribs, one to... Now they might think that for a second, but the minute they get hit, that all goes out the window. Everything becomes emotion. Everything becomes rage. There's very, very few people who could be in a fight like that and be able to accurately describe everything they did. And those people are either professional fighters. And if your guy's a professional fighter, that makes it totally different how you describe the scene. Because then you do want to describe every motion. You want to describe him dissecting his opponent's moves, him dissecting what he needs to do in split second, because this is what he does for a living. Or maybe if the guy did it as a hobby, a strong hobby. But assuming he's not a professional fighter, the only other person who might be able to describe it with that kind of detail while they're in it would be like maybe some kind of really high-end commando, tier 1 commando who's trained in unarmed combat their whole life. So if your character is not one of those two, then you need to describe the rage, the pain, the desperation they're feeling. You are not sitting back and just giving a blow by blow. You are thinking, pain filled the side of my face, or the side of Joe's face if you're doing it third person, and stars floated across his vision. He struck out desperately, not knowing who or where or how he was hitting his opponent, only feeling fists smack against flesh. And I don't want to say this like in a bad way, but if you're going to describe a physical fist fight accurately, you need to have been in one. And that, I'm not telling you to go out and get in a fight, on the street or in a bar, but take a martial arts class. Spar with somebody. It's scary. You don't have to tell me. I've done it many times. It's always scary. You never know. This person going to be that much better than me, that even though we're wearing pads, that they're going to hurt me. Yeah, it's scary, but you have to know what it's like to get hit. And the more recently that you got hit, the better. You need to know how you feel when you take a blow and it hurts and you still have to keep fighting. So that would be a recommendation. If you want to accurately describe a fist fight, go take a few martial arts classes and spar with somebody. Spar with somebody better than you are and bigger than you are, because they're more likely to hit you and you're more likely to feel the desperation your character's feeling. Don't worry, you're not going to get badly hurt. They'd lose a lot of customers if they let you get badly hurt, but just give it a shot. And as I said, if you have somebody who is really experienced and really well trained, you write that fight differently than if you have somebody who's in their first fist fight or just a regular Joe, some If it's a military science fiction book, like a regular, you know, sergeant who's in combat, who's maybe had a few fist fights but never fought somebody to the death before, that's different. That's like desperation, like Saving Private Ryan when Tom Sizemore is beating the German to death with his helmet. That's a regular Joe in a fight in combat, which is quite different than something like Jason Bourne fighting someone in the Bourne Identity, where every move, or John Wick, every move they make is thought out and calculated because they've done this so many times. So keep that in mind, that who you're describing will dictate how you describe the fight. John Wick would be like, breaking down every move the other person made and knowing exactly what he was going to do. Tom Sizemore in whatever that sergeant's name was in Saving Private Ryan is just gritting his teeth and hitting with the other guys whatever he has. Somebody who wasn't even a soldier, just some Joe, is just swinging wildly, probably going to get their ass kicked. So that's fist fights. And another thing that I have noticed in fist fights in fiction, and I've been guilty of this myself to some extent, but is when people are fighting who are not trained, there is a total lack of the desperate moves that person would make. Something like digging your thumb into somebody's eye, or grabbing them by the ear and just pulling, or kicking in the groin, gouging, scratching, biting. That stuff all happens in real fights between people who have no experience and are just desperate. And why would I say because people have an experience? Well, because people who have experience don't have to get that desperate. I mean, if somebody is an experienced MMA fighter and some mook on the street, tries to fight them, they can take him down, get a mount, just start pummeling them with punches, and that guy's done. They don't have to bite him. They don't have to gouge his eyes out because they're a machine. They're doing this like they've been trained. People who are not trained and are desperate do desperate things. I don't want to bite anybody in a fight. The only way I would ever do that is if I was losing and it was a fight to the death where if I didn't get the better of them, they were going to kill me or kill somebody else. You know why I don't want to bite somebody in a fight? Because people are dirty. You bite somebody in a fight, yeah, you can give them an infection or you can get an infection. You're getting their blood in your mouth. Do you want that? Because I don't. I don't want to gouge somebody's eyes out unless it's a life or death fight, because for one thing, it's gross. And for the other, if this is not a life or death fight, you've just gone to jail. So there's going to be an ingrained resistance to that type of thing if this is like a bar fight or some people, in an alley who get into a disagreement. But if this is a life or death fight in your book, you need to have somebody do things that are desperate. A really good example of what to watch to see what desperate people do in a fight is Deadwood. In Deadwood on HBO, watch the fight between, I can't remember the characters' names, but it's the main enforcer for Al Swearingen and the main enforcer for that rich guy that came into town. I'm drawing a blank. Hearst. George Hearst, I think it was, came into town, was trying to force people off their land so he could take their gold. And there was a fight between his enforcer, who was this huge hulking guy, and Dan Doherty, I think it was the name of the character, who was the enforcer for Al Swearingen. That fight was just brutal to watch. So watch that one. I think there was one in Game of Thrones between two champions that got really, really brutal. So watch those, read about actual fights, if you can find accounts of them. And that's something else you can do if you can watch videos of people actually fighting, because fights between people who aren't trained don't go like you think they're going to go. People who are trained, you watch MMA fights, watch those guys fight, and you'll see what it looks like when you have two experienced fighters, two people who know what they're doing, and that can go on a long time. If you're fighting somebody who knows what they're doing and won't let you do a knockout blow because they're too experienced, that fight can go on a long time. And if you're writing a fight scene where there's a bunch of people around, don't forget those aren't the only two people there. Either of them could have friends that could intervene and make things either better or worse for the main character. So if they're on the ground and one's pounding the other, don't forget that there's other people around. One of them might just lean back and kick you in the face. If you watch a fight in real life between untrained people, like in a schoolyard or outside in a bar, you will find out that almost always, if it's two untrained people, the person who takes the initiative wins. If somebody throws the first punch and connects, they almost always win the fight. Unless that other person is experienced as a fighter and knows how to take a punch, just getting hit once is enough to put them out of the fight, and then the other person's just pounding the heck out of them. It's not fun or pretty to watch. And because the person who throws the first punch usually wins, it usually means like the bully or the aggressor wins. So yeah, that's something to consider when you're writing a fight scene, is if you're going to have the guy who gets punched, who's not the aggressor, win that fight, something's got to change, because just getting punched first isn't enough to take people out of the fight. Okay, enough about fist fights. Those you can research, those you can watch. Let's go to gunfights. Gunfights are going to be harder because it's harder to watch videos. You can watch police videos of police shootings, but that's not quite the same thing as you're going to be writing. Unless you're writing about military or police in combat, if you're just having a gunfight, in an impromptu situation that the hero walks into a bad situation, it's harder to get those on video. Like I said, police shooting videos will give you a better idea, but those are a lot more chaotic than people think as well. Let's get back to the writer part of this, which is describing them. Again, most of the time, unless the person you're writing is a really, really battle-hardened soldier who has been through a lot of gunfights, or is a very bad guy who's been in a lot of gunfights. Even cops, when they're in a gunfight, because most of them have won their career, if that's it. Or if that, they'll have one instance where they have to fire their weapon in their career. A lot of cops never fire their weapon in their career. So a cop, a regular soldier who hasn't been in combat, a private citizen, when they're in a fight, they are not going to be thinking clearly. You are not going to be thinking, oh, there's a guy over there, he's 10 meters away, he's using a 9mm handgun, or in science fiction, he's using a 4-centimeter blaster pistol, and to block that, to get cover, I have to get behind that over there, that big metal tank. It's the only thing that's going to give me cover. And then I have to do this and do that and fire over here. Nobody's thinking that way in a fight unless they have been in a lot of them. So Again, desperation, fear, a lot more fear than a fist fight, primal fear of imminent death. People don't know how many rounds they've fired in a gunfight. So don't have your main character thinking, oh, I've got 10 rounds left, unless they check the gun and see. They aren't going to know how many they have left. They might have fired off every round in the weapon already and not even know it. People, when they get shot in real life with bullets that we have now, sometimes don't know it. Whether that's going to be a case in your novel is going to depend on how far in the future it is, what weapons they're using, if they have any armor on. But don't have them immediately know they've been shot unless it's something obvious like their hand gets shot off. I mean, you're going to know, you're going to see it. But if they get shot, they may not know it at first. If the enemy gets shot, that enemy may not know it. When people are trying to shoot back, they may not be using their sights correctly. Just to give you an example, in the Civil War, there have been rifles found on both sides that had like 6 or 7 bullets loaded and tamped down with the rod, and they never fired. They never fired any of them because they would go through what they've been trained. They'd load the rifle, and they'd forget to fire, or they would not put the powder. They wouldn't prime it. They wouldn't put a primer on. They wouldn't put a cap on the end of the thing when they fired. They would forget to push a cap onto the little nipple, and they'd pull the trigger, and nothing would happen. But there's gunshots going off all around them, so they wouldn't know they didn't fire. So they try to reload the rifle again. And that happened more than once. It happened a lot in the Civil War. So don't assume that unless it's, like I said, somebody who's highly trained and with lots of experience. Don't have your main character know automatically, oh, I'm low on ammo, or I fired 10 times, or I shot this way, I shot that guy, and I shot that guy. They're not going to know. The only people who will know are people who've been through it many times. And even then, it can get confusing. Adrenaline does crazy things to your mind, to your perceptions. A lot of the characters I write have seen lots of combat, so they know that what adrenaline is doing to them, they can handle it. And if you're writing a very experienced character, maybe he will too, or she. But don't assume. If you're writing some just normal, private in his first combat, he's going to be lucky if he hears orders telling him to go a certain way. He's going to be lucky if he remembers to pull the trigger. Now, there's people. Militaries have been experimenting for centuries with ways to get soldiers to fight more, to pull the trigger more, to kill other people with less thought about it, because it goes against your nature to want to kill somebody unless they're trying to kill you. So militaries have been trying to do this for a long time, and maybe in the future they'll have some way to make people not as agitated about it. But I don't know that people nowadays want to read that. I mean, you're writing the book not just to make what you think is going to happen in the future. You're also writing it to try to get people who live now interested. And if you have some soldier who doesn't have a conscience and doesn't have any hesitation and was never really a new recruit with fears and doubts, well, I don't know that people living now want to read that. So that's something you have to take into consideration. Okay. And when you write, for instance, gunfights in combat, ground combat, don't forget to take into account that you're writing through the point of view of a soldier on the ground. Frequently they don't know what's going on. Maybe they'll have some futuristic heads-up display in their helmet to tell them, but will they have the presence of mind to look and to understand what it's saying to them? So they're going to be confused. They're not going to know what the big picture is. They're going to be lucky if they can figure out where the people around them are. And again, this is for somebody who's not your, uber commando who's been doing this for years. But they're not going to have that sense until after the battle. I mean, even in training, I can tell you that you don't know what's going on. You hear shots over here and shots over there, and until somebody explains to you afterwards what happened, you have no idea. So don't think that your main character is going to know what's happening, and don't portray them as having a clear idea of what's going on in the battle around them. So what do you write then? You may be saying, well, what am I going to write? You're going to write somebody whose face is in the mud, who has bullets or whatever, lasers, something incoming all around them that could kill them at any second, and they're afraid to even stick their head up. And when they do, they'll be lucky if they can see what they're shooting at. If they can, they'll be lucky if they can tell that they hit them. You're writing about their feelings. You're writing about gut level fear, about desperation. And the very few people who have any idea what's going on, those are the ones that get medals in combat. They know that machine gun nest is the one that needs to get cleared out or we're all going to die. And I'm the only one who seems to know that that's what's got to happen and is willing to get up and go do it. So if your character is a hero, a moment of clarity in the middle of a fight where they see this is what has to get done is how that happens. They're not like just picking apart the landscape and like scanning and saying, okay, these guys there, they see there's a threat straight ahead and it's killing their friends, the people around them, and they have to take care of it. All right. And now getting to the most difficult combat you can write, and that is space combat. My advice to you, because space combat, realistically written with technology that we can foresee right now, would be really boring. It would involve a lot of people sitting around in a room. If they're using beam weapons, you may not feel anything when you get hit. If it's projectile weapons or missiles, it could take hours for the weapons to get there. That's not fun to write. My only suggestion for you in that situation is that you write snippets from different people's points of view. So this is going to be difficult if it's a first-person book, and if you're writing a space combat novel with a first-person point of view, good freaking luck, because that's going to be hard. But if you can do like multiple people's points of view to the most interesting thing, like the commander is looking at one thing and the engineering crew or the damage control crew is looking at another, that type of thing, you can switch back and forth and just give little snippets of the most interesting bits. Or, and this is what I would recommend, when you design your whole universe and you're designing your technology, make it something that makes space combat more interesting. Like I had one series where the method of transportation propulsion they use was like an Alcubierre space-time inflation drive sort of thing. It warped space-time around the ship, which meant you couldn't just fire a laser or a missile at the ship because it shifts everything around it. So you either had to ram other ships with your warp field and try to collapse theirs, after which you could shoot them, or you had to, eventually they found this way to project a short-range beam of the same type of energy that warped space at the other ship's warp field and drop their field. But you had to be really close for that. So that turned hours and days of boredom with seconds of sheer terror into 18th century naval combat, which is a lot more interesting to write. So when you design your technology for something like, a military science fiction space fleet book, make sure that the technology serves the interest of the narrative, that it makes it interesting to write space combat. Because otherwise, it's not. If you try to write realistic space combat with modern technology extrapolated to things like fusion drives or whatever, just regular Newtonian physics, yeah, it's going to be really boring to write and to read. Sorry, my dog just saw the UPS guy and went nuts. Buddy, shh. That's going to be really boring to write and to read. So make sure that you create a technology that makes space battles interesting if space battles are going to be one of the main things in your book. I've written a series that had space battles that were with, conventional drives, and I had to fudge things a little bit. I managed to make it interesting, but it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. If you're going to do something like that, my only advice, besides besides switching points of view a lot, like making a break, short point of view from somebody, another break, a short point of view from somebody else, is to do a lot of inner monologue, somebody thinking about what's going on. It's really hard. So of all the types of combat you can write, space combat, like fleet action with conventional physics, is the hardest to make interesting. You really have to fudge the physics and make your star drive and your shields and your propulsion systems something non-standard, something that's we don't understand yet, which is fine. This is science fiction, but if you're designing things like your FTL drive or your defense shield or your weapons, make sure that they're interesting to describe. It won't matter if you have the most realistic hard science fiction book in the world. If you spend 10 chapters on space battles and they all suck, they're all boring as hell to read, nobody's going to care that your science was good. If you're going to do that, you might as well barely describe the space battles and stick to ground combat where it's interesting. And that's a possibility for you. If you're writing military science fiction and for reasons you want a hard science fiction, realistic propulsion system and no shields and weapons that like coil guns and missiles that are going to take hours to get there, then you better barely go into that and spend most of your time describing the Marines on the ground, because that people are going to want to read that. They're not going to want to read guys sitting around the bridge of a battleship saying the missile's 10 minutes out. Okay, go into evasion maneuver 3, and then they just sit there for 10 minutes, and finally it hits and it doesn't destroy them, and like, okay, now launch our own missiles. It's not going to be something that is easy to make sound interesting. You can do it. I have tried to do it. I think it was interesting. I mean, the books were successful enough, but it involved lots and lots of switching POVs, like have the captain for half a page, scene break, go to engineering for half a page, scene break, go to damage control for half a page, scene break. It's involved. It's a lot of switching around. It takes a lot of planning. Whereas if you are writing like in the as I said, in the Duty on Our Planet series with that star drive that forces you to get really close to fight somebody, then you can stay on the bridge and you can have your Captain Kirk scene where he's like watching the enemy ship fire, and you're close enough to see the weapons hit. And that's totally unrealistic with the technology we have now. But if, like I said, if your technology is something where you have to get short range to hit somebody, then it becomes realistic. It's hand wavium to some extent, but it's consistent within the hand wavium. Okay, so the good part about ground combat and hand-to-hand combat is you can watch videos of people actually in it. For fleet combat, you're going to have to study. You're going to have to decide which era in blue water naval combat best fits the technology you have. Is it going to be World War II combat where you send smaller ships out to hunt for the other guy's fleet? Is it modern combat where everything is missiles fired from miles and miles away? Or is it like 18th century naval combat where you get real close and have broadsides with each other? That's the most fun to write. So if you can invent a technology that makes that practical, go for it. That's the way to do it. Your aim in writing this book, in designing the technology for this book, you may think it's to be as realistic as possible, but it's to entertain the reader as much as possible. And to do that, you're going to need something that's going to excite them and create tension with your characters. So again, if you're going to do that, if you're going to describe it, again, you are not describing every single shot and the effects of every single shot. Although you may bring that in with like reports from different people, you're describing what the main character's feeling. Does he think he's going to die? Does he feel like they're outnumbered? This is it. Is he thinking about home? Is he thinking about hoping it's quick? You know, that's the kind of thing that people want to read. That's the kind of thing you have to describe is the feeling of the main character in combat. Whether it's a fist fight, a gunfight, a dogfight in a fighter, or a battleship fight in space, either way, you have to be describing what the main character is experiencing, what they're seeing, what they're feeling, what they're hearing. Are they smelling blood? Are they smelling burnt flesh? Are they smelling smoke? Are they sealed inside of a helmet and smelling their own body odor and wishing they smelled anything else? These are the kinds of things you have to write in a combat scene. If they're getting hit, you have to know what it's like to get hit. If they are desperate and flailing around, you need to know what it's like to not be able to see what you're hitting. If they're down in a hole, afraid to raise their head up and firing rounds over their head and can't even see what they're shooting at, or firing at targets they're not sure if they're going to hit anything, that's what you have to describe. They aren't described that they have to think about thinking, because thinking is not going to come naturally. They're going to have to force themselves to look at things rationally. They're going to be full of adrenaline. Their hands are going to be shaking. Their breath is coming in short pants. Their heart's beating at 100 miles a minute. You need to know these things. You need to describe them. You can't just say he ran from one cover to the other. Swap magazines. No. His pulse was racing. He couldn't hear anything over the beat of his own heart. That's the kind of thing. He threw himself at cover with rounds barely passing an inch from him. That's the kind of thing you're going to have to do to make things interesting for combat. My dog is about to bark again because there goes UPS guy the other direction. Yeah, there you go. All right. That's it for today. I hope this was helpful to you. I will try to talk to you sooner. As I said, if you have any ideas for this, what you want to see, what would you like me to talk about, hit me with your best shot, and I will talk to you later on.